Somewhere in the high desert of far west Texas, a light rises out of empty grassland where no road, house, or fire has ever been recorded. It splits into two. It drifts against the wind. Then it vanishes, only to reappear miles away. People have watched this happen for over 140 years, and nobody, not the U.S. Army, not physicists with spectrometers, has ever fully explained it. That's where we're ending today, at number 1, because once you see why that light still can't be explained, everything else on this list is a warm-up. Texas is packed with places history left unfinished. Drowned towns, burned colleges, roads that were never meant to be haunted but somehow are. Today we're counting down 15 of them, real locations you can find on a map, each with documented history and a piece nobody has closed the book on. Stick around, the further we go, the stranger this gets. Let's start at number 15. In Callahan County, at a place called Belle Plaine. In the 1870s, this was meant to be a hub of West Texas ambition, home to a courthouse, a cemetery, and Belle Plaine College, built to bring higher education to the frontier. It didn't last. The county seat moved elsewhere. The college shut its doors, and the buildings were left to the wind. What remains are stone ruins scattered across a quiet pasture 6 miles from Baird. Visitors who make the trip after dark report lights flickering among the graves with no clear source, and figures glimpsed near the old college walls that don't hold up under a flashlight. Nobody lives here to explain it away. And if a college town falling silent bothers you, wait until you hear about the one that essentially built modern Texas education, then vanished over a single stubborn decision. That brings us to number 14. Independence, in Washington County. Founded in the 1820s, this was for a time the wealthiest and most influential town in Texas, home to Baylor University, then the premier institution in the state. But when the Santa Fe Railroad wanted to lay track through town in the 1880s, the city's leadership said no. It seemed like a small decision. It wasn't. Transportation dried up, the university relocated to Waco, and Independence quietly emptied out. What's left are 4 original Baylor columns standing alone under old oak trees, guarding a campus that technically still exists but hasn't held a class in over a century. From a town undone by its own leadership, we move to one undone by something colder, economics itself. Number 13 takes us to Thurber, straddling the Erath and Palo Pinto County line. At its peak in the early 1900s, Thurber was the leading coal producer in the state and one of the first Texas towns with full electric service, genuinely ahead of its time. Then, within about 15 years, right through the Great Depression, it was completely emptied. Today, its red brick buildings and a lone smokestack still stand along the highway, photographed constantly, explained rarely. A town that modern doesn't collapse that fast without something breaking hard. If Thurber's collapse feels sudden, the next stop was never peaceful to begin with. Number 12 is Fort Griffin in Shackelford County, once known simply as the Flat. This was frontier Texas at its rawest, a lawless settlement tied to buffalo hunters, cattle drives, and gunfighters, including a young Doc Holliday, said to have dealt cards here before his more famous exploits further west. The fort was abandoned in 1881, and the town around it didn't survive much longer. What's left are crumbling foundations and a cemetery holding graves from a period locals describe carefully, since so much of what happened here went undocumented on purpose. Investigators point to that violent history as the reason strange sounds and figures keep getting reported near the old fort grounds. From frontier violence, we move to something older and more sacred. That's number 11, Medicine Mound in Hardeman County. The name comes from 4 dolomite mounds long used by the Comanche, Kiowa, and other Plains tribes as ceremonial sites. Considered spiritually significant well before any Anglo settlement existed. By the early 1900s, a small town of around 500 people had grown up around the mounds, with more than 20 businesses. Then, in 1932, a fire destroyed much of what had been built, and the slow decline that followed closed the school, post office, and gin by the 1950s. What remains? A general store, an old bank building, scattered foundations, sits in the shadow of ground native peoples treated as an entry point to the underworld. Our next stop involves a story Texas historians have gone out of their way to correct, and the correction is almost stranger than the myth. Number 10 is the so-called San Antonio Ghost Tracks, a railroad crossing near Shane Road on the city's south side. For decades, the story told here was specific and devastating. A school bus full of children stalled on the tracks and was struck by a train, killing everyone aboard. Generations of visitors parked on the crossing, sprinkled baby powder on their trunks, and swore small ghostly handprints appeared afterward, as if children were still pushing cars to safety. But historians who searched for records of that bus accident found nothing. No matching wreck, no death toll, no news coverage of the tragedy as described. In 2022, the crossing was permanently removed during highway construction, erasing the site entirely. So what were people experiencing for decades? Some point to a genuine optical illusion created by the road's slope, which makes a parked car appear to roll uphill on its own. Whatever the explanation, thousands insist they felt something push their car forward, at a place tied to a tragedy that, as far as anyone can document, never happened. From an illusion, we move to a location with no ambiguity about the deaths, only about what still lingers on board. At number 9, we're anchoring the list at Corpus Christi, aboard the Lexington, a decommissioned aircraft carrier that served through brutal fighting in World War II and is now a museum ship docked on the bay. The ship saw real combat and real losses, which is likely why so many staff and visitors report feeling like they're not entirely alone below decks. Cold spots in sealed corridors, footsteps on empty stairwells. A recurring account of a polite young sailor in white, nicknamed Charlie by staff, who appears and vanishes in the same handful of passageways. From steel and steam, we go next to raw limestone and a hole in the ground that experienced cavers still approach with real caution. Number 8 is the Devil's Sinkhole, just outside Rock Springs on the Edwards Plateau. This is the largest known single-chamber cavern in Texas, a vertical shaft roughly 50 feet wide that drops more than 300 feet into a cavern wide enough to swallow the Statue of Liberty. It was named in 1876 by settlers who found the opening and wanted no further part of exploring it. Archaeological evidence found at the site suggests Native Americans treated the sinkhole the way they treated other caves and springs in the region, as a literal doorway to the underworld. Today, the cave is home to millions of Mexican free-tailed bats that pour out each evening in a spiraling column. But access is tightly restricted, guided tours only, because the drop is real and the cave has claimed lives before. If a hole in the ground with that kind of history unsettles you, wait until you hear how quickly the town at our next stop switched from mining boom to ghost town. That's number 7, Terlingua, near Big Bend. In the early 1900s, the Chisos Mining Company brought a wave of workers here to extract mercury. And at the height of World War I, close to 40% of the mercury mined in the entire United States came out of this stretch of desert. Then, prices collapsed, the ore ran out, and by the end of World War II, the mining company had filed for bankruptcy. The result is a genuine ghost town of adobe ruins, an abandoned church, and a cemetery. resettled decades later by artists and desert wanderers looking for a place remote enough to disappear into. Longtime locals will tell you the old mine shafts still carry the miners who never made it back out. From a mining collapse driven by economics, we move to something no boardroom decision could have prevented: 2 hurricanes, 11 years apart. That erased an entire Texas port from the map. Number 6 is Indianola on Matagorda Bay in Calhoun County, and this one deserves to be told carefully, because real people died here in devastating numbers. In the 1870s, Indianola was a booming port, home to roughly 5,000 residents, and a serious rival to Galveston for control of Texas shipping. On September 16, 1875, a major hurricane struck the town directly. With a storm surge that swallowed most of its buildings, historical estimates put the death toll between 150 and 300 people. The town rebuilt. It shouldn't have had to do it twice. On August 19, 1886, a second, even more violent hurricane hit, followed by fire that consumed nearly everything the first storm hadn't already destroyed. Only a handful of buildings were left standing. The remaining residents evacuated for good, the post office closed the following year, and Indianola was formally abandoned. Galveston took over as the state's main port in its place, a shift in Texas history triggered entirely by these 2 storms. Today, most of the original town site sits underwater in the bay, with a lone granite marker on shore honoring what stood there. Speaking of the water taking a town back, our next stop is a whole community that vanished beneath a different kind of flood, one built entirely on purpose. That's number 5, Old Bluffton, resting at the bottom of Lake Buchanan in the Texas Hill Country. Bluffton was founded in the 1850s, a stagecoach stop that grew into a real community of around 50 families, complete with a school, a blacksmith shop, a hotel, and pecan orchards along the Colorado River. In the 1930s, the Buchanan Dam was built as part of a wave of Depression-era public works, and the town's fate was sealed. Residents sold their land, and in some cases exhumed and relocated the graves of their own relatives before the rising water covered everything in 1937. For most of the last 90 years, Old Bluffton has simply not existed to the eye. 30 feet of lake sitting on top of it. But severe drought has a way of pulling secrets back to the surface. In 1984, and again more dramatically in 2009 and 2011, the water dropped low enough to expose building foundations, rusted tools, and the eerie outlines of old graves pressed into the lake bed. Nobody knows exactly when the next drought will bring it back. And if a town resurfacing from underwater feels strange, the next stop involves a light that has never needed water, or fire, or any explanation anyone has been able to prove. If this is the kind of history that gets under your skin the way it gets under mine, go ahead and hit subscribe now so you don't miss where this list ends up. The strangest entries are still ahead. And while you're at it, drop a comment and tell me what state or country you're watching from tonight. Because this channel reaches a lot further than Texas, and I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Number 4 is Bragg Road, deep in the big thicket of Hardin County, also known locally as the Ghost Road. This 8-mile stretch of dirt was originally a railroad line cut through the thicket in 1902 to carry oil, logs, and cattle between the town of Bragg and the still surviving town of Saratoga. When the rails were pulled up in 1934, the roadbed remained, and it was around this time people began reporting a strange light drifting along the road at night, later named the Light of Saratoga. Witnesses describe a single glowing orb, sometimes bluish-white, sometimes yellow, that appears a short way down the road and simply cannot be caught. Drivers who try to chase it say it always stays ahead, then vanishes. The most repeated explanation is folklore, a railroad brakeman decapitated in an accident, eternally searching the tracks with his lantern for his missing head. The more grounded explanations point to swamp gas or distant headlights. But locals note the light was reported well before cars and highways existed in the area to explain it away. From a light nobody can catch, we move to a bridge where the fear isn't in what you might see. It's in what the site represents. Number 3 is Old Alton Bridge in Denton County, better known today as Goatman's Bridge. Built in 1884 to carry horses and later automobiles over Hickory Creek, this iron truss bridge takes its nickname from a specific and painful legend. The most repeated version tells of Oscar Washburn, a successful black goat farmer who, according to the story, was targeted and killed by local Klansmen in August of 1938 after hanging a sign on the bridge advertising his business. It needs to be said plainly, Denton County researchers who have combed through death records, newspapers, and census data have found no documentation confirming a man named Oscar Washburn or a lynching matching this account. The story may be exactly that, a story. One that nonetheless echoes a real and documented pattern of racial violence that shaped this era of Texas history. What's undeniable is the bridge itself, listed on the National Register of Historic Places since 1988. And what people report experiencing on it: unexplained knocking answered from the woods, a stench with no source, a horned figure glimpsed at the tree line. From a legend rooted in earthly cruelty, we move to a story that claims something considerably less earthly. Number 2 takes us to Aurora, in Wise County, northwest of Fort Worth, site of one of the strangest news stories ever printed in a Texas newspaper. On April 19, 1897, the Dallas Morning News ran an account, credited to local resident S.E. Hayden, describing a cigar-shaped airship that had allegedly circled the town before colliding with a windmill on Judge J.S. Proctor's property 2 days earlier. The article claimed the pilot, described as not of this world, died in the wreck and was given a Christian burial in the Aurora Cemetery, complete with a grave marker. That marker has since disappeared. In the 1970s, aviation writer Bill Case investigated the site with a metal detector and found fragments of an unusual aluminum alloy near the grave, reigniting national attention decades after the story had faded. A 2008 History Channel investigation opened a sealed well on the property, reportedly where crashed debris had been dumped, and again pulled out metal fragments, though testing stayed inconclusive. Skeptics have long argued the account was a hoax dreamed up to save a declining town from irrelevance, and the timing supports that theory. But the tale predates Roswell by nearly 50 years, it's backed by an actual archived newspaper, and no one has ever definitively closed the case either way. That brings us at last to the one that started this whole list. Number 1 is the Marfa Lights, out on the grassland east of Marfa in Presidio County. The first known account dates to 1883. When a young cowhand named Robert Reed Ellison saw a flickering light while driving cattle through nearby Paisano Pass, and assumed it was an Apache campfire. When he and other settlers rode out to investigate, they found no ashes, no burned wood, no sign anyone had ever camped there. That same basic experience has repeated for well over a century. The lights appear at a distance, split apart, drift, change color, and disappear, sometimes in front of groups of witnesses standing at a dedicated viewing area the state eventually built because sightings became so frequent. The theories have piled up almost as fast as the sightings. Ghosts of Spanish conquistadors. Electrostatic discharge. piezoelectric charge from the mineral-rich rock beneath the flats. A theory advanced by a retired aerospace engineer who spent years studying the phenomenon with infrared cameras. The most widely accepted scientific explanation points to a mirage, distant car headlights bent by layers of warm and cool desert air stacked over flat terrain, similar to how a ship can appear to float above the ocean horizon. University researchers in 2004 and again in 2008 spent nights on site with monitoring equipment, and their conclusion was careful. Some sightings are almost certainly headlights, but a smaller number of documented cases show movement that doesn't match any passing vehicle. And that's the heart of why this story refuses to close. The first sighting happened 16 years before cars existed in Texas, decades before the highway near the viewing area was ever built. So even if today's lights are partly explained by traffic, something was already out there in 1883, dancing for a cowhand who had no explanation to reach for. People have watched it for 140 years now, calling it friendly, calling it eerie, calling it home. Nobody's ever made it stop. That's 15 places, and honestly, we've barely scratched what's actually out there across this state. If one of these hit harder than you expected, or if you've stood in one of these spots yourself, tell me about it below. I read every one. And if you want to go further down this road with me, there are plenty more of these waiting. Stick around, because the next one might be closer to you than you think.